You have notes?
No.
How are you going to know what to ask me?
Look at the camera.
Okay. Well, I got to talk to you though.
Okay. What's your name? What your name?
Mary Redmon.
Your full name?
Mary Kathleen Manson Redmon. How's that?
Were you named after anybody, or how
No.
did your parents pick you?
I have no idea. They just like the name Mary and Kathleen. That's all I know.
And when were you born?
January 8th, 1926. On a cold winter day.
And who are your parents?
Lily and Enoch Benson.
Okay, tell me what was it like growing up? You grew up on farms?
Yeah, we lived on a farm. And we had an old house. I thought it was a nice house though. It had a kitchen, a dining room, living room, and one bedroom downstairs. No bath. 3 bedrooms upstairs. One room we didn't use for bedroom. We used it as a junk room. And my 2 brothers, Dwight and Clyde, slept in one room, and my sister and I slept in the other room. And the other room had nothing but junk and storage. And before we lived there, the Steeleys owned the place, and the Steeleys lived there. And the room had just been plastered and never papered or anything. So they started writing events that happened different times. And so we continued.
What kind of events? Events in their life?
The events in the Steeleys' life. We bought a team of horses, so-and-so date. Or we shingled the barn a certain date. And the Steeleys wrote that on. So then my dad continued writing little things all over the wall. And then we kids kind of added to it by coloring a lot too. My parents didn't want us to color. But my parents put a lot of things that they wanted to remember the dates of on that wall. And that room was never for the public, ever for the public. And then when I was an 8th grader.
Oh, and
Okay.
You didn't say where you grew up in. This was around Highland or Robinson?
No, the address was Robinson, Kansas, and we were about 15 miles from Robinson. But the address was Robinson, Kansas.
So this was the one house that you grew up in
when
you were little?
That's right. I was born there.
So they didn't move around a lot?
No, that's right. I was born there. All of we 4 kids were born in that house.
But you didn't own it? Your folks didn't own it?
My dad farmed it, and there was only 80 acres, and he farmed it with horses. Until the last year or so that we lived there, he did get a new tractor, a farm-all tractor. But, 80 acres was a lot for our 2 horses or 4 horses, they probably had 4. To farm in those days, that was a lot of work.
So tell me about your folks. Did he have hired hands?
Mm-hmm. Whenever they needed it. Shucking, when they shucked corn, and when they did the wheat, they had to cut the wheat, they shocked the wheat, it went into bales, and then they shocked it, and then they picked it up, and then they put it into big bundles. And then the thresher came along, and they pitched those bundles up into a wagon, and then bring them into the barn and threshed them. So they always had to have extra help then. And there were, high school boys, there were a lot of kids that didn't go to high school back in those days. And they just were farm hands.
Did you kids do stuff too?
Yeah. We used to go walk through the corn and cut cucumberrs out. My dad was death on cucumberrs. He didn't want any cucumberrs in his field. And that was before, weed killed time. And the cultivator would get a lot of them. But right in the rows of the corn, there would be the cucumberrs. And so we kids would walk the fields and get the cucumberrs out with the corn knife, chop them down. That was hard work.
Did you get paid?
No, heavens, no, we didn't get paid. We lived, that was part of our food and our clothes. And, back in those days, parents didn't pay kids for anything. because they say, you live here too, you know, you have to help maintain this place. So that's what we did. We weren't overworked, but all kids had to do it. All kids had to do it back in those days.
You always had electricity? You know,
No,
ongoing.
oh heavens no.
No?
We had coal oil lamps.
Oh, you remember when there wasn't electricity?
Oh, we didn't have electricity. Never in that house. Never in that house.
In the house you grew up in, you didn't have electricity?
Uh-uh.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Nothing.
I knew Dad didn't, but Dad was 12 when he moved into town here with electricity. I never heard that.
No, I think they had electricity in one house before they moved to town. I think.
He always said he was 12 years old before he had electricity and running water when they moved into this town, this house right up here on 6th Street, off of 6th Street.
Yeah, but he was probably 14 when he moved to town.
He was 12.
Okay.
Gene was 6, he was 12.
Okay, all right. I don't know. Can't answer for him.
Okay, so you didn't have electricity in this house, ever?
Not ever, not ever, not ever. No bathroom. We had an outside toilet. Right. Never electricity. Now what do you want to know?
Well, tell me about your parents.
What about?
So your mom didn't work.
Well,
She worked on the
hard.
farm.
Every Monday morning she did the laundry. Big laundry. Big laundry.
She just did it on one day?
Oh, yes. And she had a washing machine out on the porch. Daddy would carry in the water, and she had to put a big boiler on the cook stove that she used wood and cobs for. And she had to keep putting the wood and cobs in that stove all the time to keep that hot so the water would get real hot. Then Daddy would carry it out and pour it into the washing machine, and then they added, and I think they didn't add cold water. Then he had to fill the 2 tubs, but rinse tubs. And so she washed, and they took a handle and they did like this, and that washed the clothes. There was no electricity, you know. So Daddy did that. And then when that was done, then there was a wringer, and then she'd pick up all the clothes. Now they were too hot for her to handle, so she had to have a stick, and she'd pick up the clothes and put them in that wringer and wring them out. That would wring the soapy water back down, and they go into this clear water, and they rinse there. And then she'd put the rollers over here, and then she'd rinse them in this one, and then rinse them over here in the bluing. She'd put bluing in it to whiten the clothes. That's how the clothes got white. And then from there, they wrung them out and hung them on the line. She did. And then in the wintertime, it was too cold to put those things out on the line. And they would stretch lines all around the kitchen and the living room and the dining room. And she would hang clothes in our house. Of course, we kids were in school. So they would be drying all day long, and they'd have to really burn the wood stoves so that the clothes would dry. Then she'd have to put the sheets back on the bed, and we had blanket sheets back in those days because our houses weren't heated, you know. So they'd have to get that dry and get the beds made Monday.
And she did all that in one day?
In one day, that's exactly, and it took all day. Tuesday she would iron. Had a big ironing. And she had a gas iron, no electricity, and it was a gas, and it had a container up here that Daddy poured gas in. They were dangerous. They were dangerous. And then he'd light it, and it would get hot, and she would iron with that. She'd starch, because she used to starch clothes. I don't know how she did it. I could never do that. And I complain about some of the things I have to do, but my gosh, they did that all the time. And then the other day, of course, she always raised the garden, a big garden, and we had all of our own vegetables. And then that would be in the spring, and the summer she'd raise the garden. Then she'd can. We had a basement under the house, and that basement was full of canned goods. Corn, peas, beans, mixed vegetables. And Daddy would butcher, and he butchered hogs and beef, and Mother used to can beef and put them in jars. They were good. We thought they were awful good back in those days. Let's see, and they raised their own potatoes. We had a potato pit down there. Oh, they worked so hard. And then one day a week, Mother baked, and she baked bread, and that lasted for a week. And she also made cinnamon rolls. That was our dessert that she made.
Every week?
Once a week. I don't know what day that was, Wednesday or Thursday. I remember when we'd come home from school, we'd have cinnamon rolls or a good slice of bread with butter on it. And we had homemade butter. They had their cows, and they separated their milk and separated the cream from the milk. We didn't have a refrigerator, remember, so in the winter, they'd have them outside on the porch. And then a lot of times they had to bring them in or cover them up or what, because they'd freeze. But in those days, and then in the summertime they brought ice, and we had an ice box, and it was like a refrigerator down below, and on top was the ice, a big chunk of ice. And we bought ice once a week, and that would last us. It was just a little bitty chunk by the end of the week. Sometimes, then we finally had a little delivery truck went by, and they would deliver ice. We might get it twice a week then. Oh, that was a lot of work.
Did you have animals on the farm too?
Sure, horses, cows, and chickens. Pigs, we had some pigs. That's all. We never had cattle. Daddy never did raise cattle. We had horses, and the horses would have to have a big watering tank, and they'd have to chop ice off of the water every morning because it would be frozen about that thick, sometimes that thick, and then it get thicker, thicker, thicker if they didn't break it up. And then they'd have to throw that out so the water wouldn't be so cold. They had no way of heating it. And you just think back how hard that was for them to work so hard. And my folks were not the only one, everybody out there. And we were always poor, but we didn't know we were poor. Everybody was the same way. Everybody was the same way. Because the Depression days were in the 30s. And that's when the banks went broke and people lost their money, and it was just really a bad, 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 bad time. A lot of people took out bankruptcy because they were really poor. I mean, really poor.
You didn't have to do anything like that.
My dad never did take bankruptcy. He never did have any big savings, that's why. If he had big savings, see, the banks went broke.
Yeah.
That's why people lost their money. It wasn't their fault. Banks went broke, so they lost their money for them. Yeah.
So where'd you go to school? You went to school at farm schools?
Heckler School.
Uh-oh. Oh no, that's something in there. I thought that was my camcorder. That's there.
Went to Heckler School.
And how far was that?
District about a mile and a fourth. A mile and a fourth. And that we walked every day to school, and we had to walk in snow, sometimes clear up to our waist. It was clear up to our waist. But it was so cold that the snow would freeze and we could walk on top of the snow. Sometimes it wouldn't be quite hard enough and we'd sink clear to our thighs.
You got school buses?
And we were District 35, and there were about 35 kids in school. They were 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders.
I never understood how a teacher could teach all these different
Don't ask me how they
grades
did.
in one room.
Yeah, they did. Well, I tell you, okay, like, I don't really remember this, but we'd have one teacher, and she would come in the morning early, and she would stay with a family that lived close to the school. She would walk to school, come in, and fix the fire in the furnace. She would start the fire in the furnace and get it good and warm. And then when we got there at 8 o'clock, the school was warm. And we'd be freezing when we got there. And we'd all stand, and we had a floor.
Not in the summertime, though.
No, but in the wintertime.
Oh, you didn't go to school in the summer?
No, that's right. We got out in April. We always got out in April.
Oh, you did?
Yes, we did. And we didn't start till September, after Labor Day.
Oh, really?
September. and we got out in April, always. And, but we'd get around that floor furnace, and it was a grate, a big square grate about 4 feet square is what it was. And we just all stand around that because.
My grandmother used to have it in her house. Wasn't
Yeah,
that a
like
great thing?
Grandma Wilbur used to have that.
No, Grandmother Redmon in the big house.
No, she didn't.
She did too. You stepped on it, you burned your feet.
Where was it?
In between the two, the dining room and the living room. That big grate thing, and if you stepped on it, you got burned.
Grandma Wilbur had one, but Grandma
In the
Redmond
house.
never did have one of those. Well,
remember
no,
that.
no, that was Grandma Vogel's. That was Grandma Vogel's. Grandma Redmond never had that. That's all right. But anyway, that's what we had. And so maybe she'd say, okay, first grade comes first, and we'll have reading. So whoever's in first grade would come, and in front of the school would be some benches. And we'd come up here and sit down on the benches while all the rest of them stayed back in their seats and studied their lessons. They never paid any attention to what we were doing up here. And the teacher would say, okay, Mary, you read the first page in reading. And so maybe I'd read, and then she'd ask the next one to read. However, in all my 8 years, I was always the only one in my class. I never had another kid in my class. I was always alone. My brother Clyde had 6 in his class. So let's talk about their class instead of my class, because I was always the only one. So in English, okay. You were assigned yesterday to write a sentence. So you tell your sentence, and that child would tell, and then they go down the row. And when that was over, okay, second grade comes up, and they do their lesson that they had assigned the day before. They go back, the third grade, and so on and so on and so forth. And they would do it for reading, English, arithmetic, and spelling. Spelling was, they usually stayed in their seats, and she would go up and down the aisle at third grade. Okay, she would say, okay, spell school, and then everybody would write, and then they'd hand in their paper.
Did you have paper? You didn't write on slates or anything?
No, we didn't. And we did not have pens. We had ink wells with pens in them. But now, see, the first, second, third, fourth, probably the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders were the only ones that ever used ink. You know, the little ones didn't use ink. But they had ink wells and they had pens, and we had penmanship too, back in those days. But every class she'd ask to come up on these benches, and we'd recite. Those were called reciting classes.
And this was everybody from kindergarten to high school?
No kindergarten. We had no kindergarten.
Oh, okay, first
I
grade.
never went, first grade. We never
Through
went.
what grade?
8.
Through 8th grade.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So high school was somewhere else.
No, yeah. I went to White Cloud, yeah.
Went to Highland.
And then Highland. I went to White Cloud and then Highland.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. All right, so tell me about Christmases when you were a kid. Where did you spend Christmas?
Oh,
did you do it at your house? Did you go to
Christmas
grandparents'
was
house?
a
Or what?
wonderful thing. We all had relatives, and I had a lot of aunts and uncles. And so one year we would go like to my dad's family, and that was Aunt Martha, Aunt Daisy, Aunt Maida was usually not included, but Uncle Henry. They had no kids, but they lived in Junction City. And I see Uncle Henry, and that was great. Then my mother's side, and one year we would go to my mother's side and have Christmas. But the main thing we did that was the most fun is we always went to church on Christmas Eve. And we always had our Christmas program, the children's Christmas program. And I always had a new dress. All of the kids had new clothes to have. This was an occasion. The only time of the year we got new clothes about. And now, mind you, our mothers made them too. You know, they didn't go to the store and buy them at J.C. Penney's or Target or any of those places. They made them. And I can remember one year, I didn't have any dress. My mother said we were just so poor that year. I couldn't have a new dress. I just couldn't. And I was just heartbroken that I was going to have to go and recite my poem or my whatever I was doing. And sometimes we had plays, you know, Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Joseph would be in a play at church. Our Sunday school classes would do that. But this year I didn't have a new dress.
How old were you?
I was probably about fourth grade. Fourth grade. So whatever age that is. 11, 10.
Something like that.
And I was just so heartbroken. And that night I was going to have to go and put on my old dress that I'd been wearing to Sunday school every Sunday. I wore the same thing all the time. And I was upstairs and my mother came up and she had a new dress for me. That was my Christmas present. And I can remember it was royal blue. It was beautiful. She had made it, but all this time she told me, see, that was my Christmas present. And I didn't get to unwrap it the next morning for Santa Claus. But that year I got a pen. Just an Eversharp, an Eversharp. That was my Christmas present.
And the dress.
And the dress the night before. And the dress was royal blue, and then it had a white collar, and it had white cuffs. It was a short sleeve dress, had white cuffs with button down, and then just that was just fabulous. It was the most beautiful dress I've ever seen, and I was so proud to put that on and wear that to church that night. Oh, I did. That was the most exciting thing. And then at church, Santa Claus always was there, and when the program was all over, all the kids would be up in front. The parents would be in the back, and all the kids would sit up in front, and the teachers would say, okay, this class comes up. We perform on the platform. Santa Claus comes running, ho, 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 and I tell you, that's the most exciting thing, you know. And then we passed out Christmas presents, and I don't know who I gave to, and I always got a Christmas present there. Maybe somebody in my Sunday school class, maybe we drew names. I bet that's probably what we did. And I would have a package under the tree for the person I drew for, and somebody would have one for me. So we all got a present. All of us got a present. Plus, Santa Claus passed out bags of candy, of hard candy. We always got a bag of hard candy. And that was the most exciting Christmas. I mean, that's what our Christmases were. Every Christmas Eve, that's what it was.